Ready to jump into something big.
Always.
This is it, 2024 U.S. election.
Yeah.
Everyone's talking about it. Everyone's a little freaked out about it, I think it's safe to say.
Right.
But, we always say every election matters.
Yeah.
So you wanted to know, what's the big deal about this one?
Mm-hmm.
What's really different this time?
Right.
Why are the stakes so high?
Exactly.
And so we got this article.
Uh-huh.
Let's just call it pasted text.
Okay.
It digs into all of this, all the reasons this election feels different.
Yep.
And by the end of this deep dive,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to be the most informed person at your next dinner party.
That's the goal.
So jumping right in,
Yeah.
one thing that stood out to me in this article
Okay.
is how much it focuses on the long-term consequences.
Yeah.
It's not just about the next 4 years.
Right.
It's about the next 40,
Yeah, potentially.
potentially. Yeah.
Exactly. So like the ripple effect.
Ripple effects, and the
Right.
article emphasizes this idea
Mhm.
that the 2024 election could really set the course for decades on everything.
Yeah.
Climate policy, the Supreme Court, you name
Supreme
it.
Court, yeah, for sure.
So paint me a picture here. What kind of impact are we really talking about?
So let's take climate change.
Okay.
The article contrasts these two very different paths the U.S. could go down.
Okay.
We could be leading the world in green energy, right?
Okay.
Innovation.
Right.
Or we could scale back environmental protections, double down on fossil fuels. Now imagine the world your kids are going to inherit,
Wow.
depending on which path we choose.
Yeah. It's not just abstract policy anymore. It's
Uh-huh.
real life.
It's their future.
Yeah. And speaking of huge implications, the article also talks a lot about the Supreme Court,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
which, kind of makes sense, right?
Of course, of course.
Whoever wins the presidency
Yes.
could appoint multiple justices to the court.
Absolutely.
So that's going to shape its makeup for a generation.
For a generation, and the article brings up a really specific example, something that I think a lot of people are concerned about. It's the potential overturning of Roe versus Wade.
Mm-hmm.
So think about that for a second.
Yeah.
Decisions made in the next 4 years could determine the future of reproductive rights for millions of women.
I'm starting to see why everyone says this election feels different.
Right.
It's big.
Yeah, huge.
The consequences are huge.
Yeah.
But the article doesn't just focus on the presidency.
No.
It spends a lot of time on something that I think a lot of people kind of overlook,
Yeah.
which is congressional races.
Right. Right.
And I'll be honest,
Okay.
I don't always understand how much power Congress really has.
Oh, it's crucial.
Okay.
Like, think of it this way. Even the most amazing, ambitious president
Mm-hmm.
can be totally stopped in their tracks by a divided Congress.
Okay.
The article explains this whole concept called gridlock.
Okay.
Essentially, if one party controls the presidency and a different party controls either the House or the Senate or both,
Okay.
nothing gets done.
Oh, really?
Yeah, passing laws becomes almost impossible.
Oh, wow.
It's all about these checks and balances.
Right.
The House, the Senate, the president,
Okay.
they all have to agree.
Got it.
And if they don't,
Yeah.
stalemate.
Okay, so even if you love a presidential candidate,
Mm-hmm.
if their party doesn't also control Congress,
Mm-hmm.
their hands are basically tied.
Exact.
Those congressional races,
Yeah.
way more important than I realized.
They're huge.
Okay, but wait.
Okay.
The article mentioned something else that surprised me.
What's that?
It said that even state-level elections can have a big impact.
Oh, absolutely.
Really?
Yeah.
I always thought of those as kind of like the little leagues.
Well, here's the thing. State-level policies can actually become national trends.
How so?
Like, think about marijuana legalization.
Okay.
It started in a few states,
Right.
gained momentum, and now it's a major national conversation.
Okay.
Same thing with renewable energy mandates.
Ah.
What starts small can ripple outward, impacting policy across the entire country.
So my vote in my state election could actually contribute to a bigger shift.
Exactly.
That's pretty cool.
It's powerful.
Okay, this article keeps getting bigger in scope.
Mm-hmm.
It actually positions the 2024 election as a global event,
Okay.
not just an American one.
Right.
So why is that? Why does the whole world care about what happens here?
Because whether we like it or not, the U.S. plays this massive role on the world stage.
Right.
And its leadership, or lack thereof,
Yeah.
has a ripple effect on everything.
Give me an example.
International alliances, how we respond to global crises, you name it.
Okay.
So take NATO, for example.
Okay.
The article talks about how a strong U.S. commitment to NATO helps keep Europe stable and secure, but a weaker commitment
Yeah.
that could embolden Russia and increase the risk of conflict.
So something that happens in the U.S. election
Yep.
could actually affect people thousands of miles away,
That's right.
even if I never leave my hometown.
Uh-huh.
The result of this election could impact my life through global security or trade agreements.
Exactly. It's all connected.
Right.
And the article goes even deeper. It goes
Yeah.
beyond just policy
Yeah.
to talk about something that I think a lot of people are really concerned about,
Okay.
the health of American democracy itself.
Okay. Break that down for me. What does that even mean?
Well, it points to a lot of things we see in the news all the time: extreme political polarization, the rise of misinformation, fake news,
Yeah.
and this decline in public trust in institutions.
Right.
And the article argues that these things are eroding the very foundations of our democracy,
Huh.
making it harder to solve problems,
Ugh.
harder to govern effectively.
Yeah.
It's a pretty sobering thought.
It is, and it makes me wonder,
Yeah.
does this article, does it make you feel more hopeful or more worried about the future of American democracy?
That's a really good question.
Yeah.
Honestly, I don't know if I have an answer yet. I think we need to maybe unpack this idea of polarization a little bit more
Okay.
before we can even start to answer that.
Yeah, it's a word we hear a lot,
Right.
polarization.
Duh.
But what does it actually mean?
Exactly.
And how did we get here?
Right.
And like, what are the consequences of this growing divide?
Those are all important questions.
Yeah.
And to understand them, I think we need to rewind a little bit
Okay.
and explore how we got to this point.
Okay, so let's rewind. Let's
Yeah.
figure out how we got to this place where it feels like everyone's at each other's throats.
Exactly.
Because if we want to understand where American democracy is headed,
Uh-huh.
we got to understand how we got here.
Absolutely. Back to our deep dive into the 2024 elections. As we've seen, this isn't just about who sits in the Oval Office.
Nope.
It's about shaping the future of the U.S., navigating those global challenges, figuring out what American democracy even means in this day and age, right?
Yeah.
And we started to unpack this whole idea of polarization,
Right.
which the article says is a major threat to democracy.
Yeah, that part really got to me, I got to say.
Hmm.
It's like we can't agree on anything anymore. Like basic facts, let alone having a civil conversation about politics.
Yeah.
How did we even get this divided?
It's complicated, but the article highlights a few key factors.
Okay.
So first, it talks about media,
Oh, okay.
especially the rise of, these partisan news outlets and the social media echo chambers.
Right.
Think about it. We're constantly bombarded with information that's tailored to our existing beliefs.
Uh-huh.
So it's harder to see other perspectives.
Like we're all living in our own little bubbles.
Exactly. Different realities.
Yeah.
So media is a big factor.
Okay.
But what else is feeding this polarization?
Yeah.
Well, the article talks about this increasing geographic sorting of Americans.
What does that mean?
We're literally clustering ourselves into communities of like-minded people.
Yeah. Interesting.
Which just reinforces our existing beliefs
Right.
and makes it even harder to encounter different viewpoints.
It's like we're self-segregating, politically speaking.
Exactly. And then there's economic inequality,
Okay.
which the article argues has fueled a lot of resentment
Mhm.
and this sense of us versus them.
Right.
When people feel like the system isn't working for them,
Yeah.
they're more likely to become disillusioned with politics
Mm-hmm.
and embrace extreme viewpoints.
So we've got media,
Yep.
geographic sorting,
Uh-huh.
and economic anxieties
Mm.
all feeding into this.
Yeah, it's like this toxic brew of polarization.
It's no wonder it feels so hard to talk about anything these days.
Right, and the article argues that all of this is
Yeah.
making it incredibly difficult to govern effectively.
How so?
It leads to gridlock, dysfunction,
Right.
this inability to actually address the challenges that our country is facing.
Okay, so we know how we got here. But what are the consequences of all this?
Mhm.
Like, what happens if we can't bridge this divide?
Right, well, the article suggests some pretty dire consequences.
Like what?
It talks about a potential erosion of democratic norms,
Okay.
a rise in political violence,
Hmm.
and even the possibility of the U.S. becoming ungovernable.
That's a scary thought.
It is, but it's not all doom and gloom.
Okay, good.
The article does offer some glimmers of hope.
Okay, I like hope.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
talks about promoting media literacy,
But
encouraging civil discourse, and addressing those underlying economic inequalities.
if we can tackle those issues,
Yeah,
maybe we can start to heal the divides.
maybe. We have to try.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Right.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit
Okay.
and talk about something else the article highlighted,
Yeah.
the global implications of this election.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned earlier how the U.S.'s role on the world stage is kind of tied to its domestic politics.
Right. It's almost like the whole world is holding its breath. watching to see what happens in 2024 because the U.S. has such a massive influence on global affairs.
Okay, so speaking of global impact,
Yeah.
one thing that really stood out to me was the discussion of NATO.
Uh-huh.
I remember you saying that the 2024 election could either strengthen or weaken that alliance.
Exactly.
What does that actually look like in real life?
So imagine a scenario where a candidate who's skeptical of NATO wins.
Okay.
They might reduce U.S. military spending,
Mm-hmm.
pull back troops from Europe,
Okay.
generally signal a less committed stance,
Got it.
and that would send shockwaves through Europe.
Really?
Yeah, it could embolden Russia
Okay.
and potentially even lead to instability or conflict.
So something that happens here in the U.S. election could actually increase the risk of war in Europe.
It's a possibility.
Yeah, that's a lot to think about.
It is, but on the flip side, a president who strongly supports NATO reaffirms the U.S.'s commitment to its allies.
Okay.
That could help deter aggression, maintain peace and stability in the region.
So the stakes are really high.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so that's NATO. What about the U.S.-China relationship?
Oh, that's another one where the 2024 election could have huge global implications.
For sure.
The U.S.-China relationship is so complex.
It is.
It's about trade, technology, human rights, regional security, you name it.
Yeah, that's a lot.
The article doesn't make any specific predictions, but it just highlights the potential for some really significant shifts.
Like what?
Depending on who wins.
Okay.
So on the one hand, we could see a continuation of this trend towards strategic competition.
Okay.
Where the U.S. and China are vying for dominance in key areas like technology, global influence.
Right.
And that could lead to increased tensions, trade wars, even the possibility of military conflict.
Okay, so that's a little intense.
It is.
What's the other side of that coin?
Some candidates might advocate for a more cooperative approach.
Okay.
Seek to engage China on issues of mutual interest.
Like what?
Like climate change or global health.
Okay.
Now, this could lead to a more stable and predictable relationship.
Right.
But it would also require navigating some really thorny issues.
Such as?
Like human rights and intellectual property theft.
So it's a delicate balance.
Yeah, real balancing act.
And the 2024 election could tip the scales one way or the other.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've talked about NATO, China. What about other global issues? Like trade agreements or the U.S.'s response to global crises?
Yeah, the possibilities are vast.
Give me an example.
Imagine, let's say, a major humanitarian crisis erupts somewhere in the world.
Right.
A president who prioritizes diplomacy, multilateralism, might lead a global response, coordinate aid, work with international organizations.
Okay.
But a president who favors a more isolationist approach might be reluctant to get involved, potentially exacerbating the crisis.
So even something like a natural disaster or a refugee crisis could be impacted by the 2024 election.
Exactly. It really drives home the point that this isn't just about American politics.
Yeah.
It's about the future of the world.
It's a big deal.
It is a big deal.
Okay, we've talked about the global implications, but I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier.
Okay.
This idea of the health of American democracy itself.
Yeah.
The article paints a pretty sobering picture.
Yeah, it does.
All those concerns about polarization, misinformation, declining public trust.
It's a topic that's on a lot of people's minds.
I can see why.
Yeah.
But you keep saying this phrase, the health of American democracy.
Yeah.
What does that even mean?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Like, what are the signs that our democracy is actually struggling?
Right.
So the article points to a few key indicators.
Okay.
First, this extreme political polarization we keep talking about, where people are retreating into these echo chambers, demonizing anyone who holds different views.
Yeah, it's like we can't even agree on what's real anymore.
Exactly. And when people lose trust in each other and in democratic institutions, it becomes much harder to solve problems, govern effectively.
So polarization is one sign.
Yeah.
What else is the article concerned about?
It also talks about the rise of misinformation, which is just eroding public trust, making it harder for people to know what to believe.
To tell what's true from what's not true.
Exactly. And this is being fueled by social media.
Oh, for sure.
Where false or misleading information can just spread so quickly.
Like wildfire.
Yeah, and it can have a real impact.
On how people think, how they act.
Absolutely. When people are constantly bombarded with misinformation, they become disillusioned, cynical, lose faith in the democratic process.
Like, what's the point?
Exactly. And that can lead to lower voter turnout,
Right.
a weakening of those democratic institutions.
Okay, so we've got polarization, misinformation, a decline in public trust, all pointing to a democracy that's struggling to function.
Yeah. It's a worrying picture.
It is, but is there anything we can do about it? Or are we just kind of spiraling downward?
Well, the article suggests that restoring trust in the electoral process is essential.
Okay, how do we do that?
It means ensuring that elections are free, fair, secure,
Right.
and that every eligible voter has equal access to the ballot box.
Makes sense. But how do we combat all that misinformation
Right.
and rebuild public trust?
It's tough, but the article suggests that promoting media literacy is crucial.
What does that mean?
We need to help people develop the skills to critically evaluate information
Okay.
and identify false or misleading content.
So it's not just about fact-checking.
No,
It's
no.
about teaching people how to think for themselves.
Exactly. And it's about fostering a more civil and respectful public discourse
Okay.
where we can engage in thoughtful debate,
Yeah.
listen to opposing viewpoints, find common ground.
That sounds pretty idealistic in our current climate.
It does, but we have to start somewhere.
True, it has to start somewhere.
And it starts with each of us
Okay.
making a conscious effort
Right.
to engage with information thoughtfully, to be respectful of others,
Yeah,
even when we disagree,
absolutely.
and to participate in the democratic process in a constructive way.
Okay, so we've talked about the global implications.
Yeah.
The challenges facing American democracy.
Mhm.
It's a lot to process.
It is.
It can feel pretty overwhelming.
It can, but it's important to remember that we, as citizens,
Yeah.
we have a role to play in shaping the future.
Okay, I like that. It's not all doom and gloom.
No,
We can still make a difference.
we can.
How?
Well, we can start by educating ourselves about the issues,
Okay.
engaging in thoughtful discussions with
Yeah.
friends, family,
Yeah.
even people we disagree with,
Right.
and holding our elected officials accountable.
So staying informed.
Yeah.
Engaging in civil discourse.
Mm-hmm.
Participating in the political process.
Exactly. And recognizing that democracy is not a spectator sport.
What do you mean?
It requires active participation,
Got it.
a willingness to defend its principles.
Okay, I'm feeling a little less overwhelmed now.
Great.
It's like, yeah, the challenges are huge,
Mhm.
but we're not powerless.
That's the spirit.
Yeah.
And the article reminds us that even small actions can make a difference.
Like what?
Voting in every election,
Okay.
supporting organizations that align with your values, even just having those thoughtful conversations with people who hold different views.
Yeah.
These things can all contribute to a healthier democracy.
Okay, we've covered a lot.
We have.
The global stage,
Yep.
the health of American democracy, the power of individual action.
Absolutely.
But there's one more piece of the puzzle I want to explore.
Okay, what's that?
The role of technology in all of this.
Yes, the digital age.
Right. The article doesn't explicitly talk about technology,
Right.
but we can't ignore how much it's impacting the political landscape.
Absolutely not. It's everywhere.
I mean, we're talking social media, online campaigning, data analytics, artificial intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like technology is changing the game entirely.
It really is, and it's raising a lot of questions
Okay.
about privacy, security,
Yeah.
the potential for manipulation.
Right. All that stuff.
Yeah, so let's dive into that digital dimension of
Yeah.
the 2024 election.
Let's see how technology is shaping the race,
Mhm.
for better or worse.
Right. It's a crucial conversation to have.
Absolutely.
As we become increasingly reliant on technology in our lives,
Yeah.
it's essential to understand how it's influencing our politics.
And shaping the future of our democracy.
Exactly.
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive
Okay.
into the 2024 elections.
Yeah.
I feel like we've covered so much ground already.
We have.
The long-term stakes, the global picture, the health of American democracy, even technology.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot.
It is.
But now I'm thinking, okay,
Yeah.
what might actually happen? What could the outcomes of this election really look like?
I know, right? Everyone wants to know.
What's the future hold?
Crystal ball time.
But instead of making predictions,
Yeah.
let's just explore some possible scenarios,
Okay, I like that.
right? Because there's so many variables at play.
Exactly.
So let's start with the presidential race.
Okay.
Let's say, just hypothetically,
Mm.
a candidate who's really progressive wins.
Okay.
What kind of concrete changes might we see?
Well, in that scenario, get ready for a potential shift towards a much more active role for the government.
Okay, like what would that look like?
Think bold initiatives, big investments.
Give me an example.
Like tackling climate change, maybe something like a Green New Deal.
Okay.
Big investments in renewable energy, stricter environmental regulations.
That's a big change.
It would be.
What about social policy?
We could see a push to expand social safety nets, maybe even a renewed conversation about universal health care.
So access to health care, affordable housing, education.
Exactly. Those could be major priorities.
Okay, so that's one path, a progressive wave.
Yeah.
But what about the opposite?
Okay.
What if a more traditionally conservative candidate wins?
Well, then we might see a very different set of priorities.
Like what?
Reducing the size and scope of government, cutting taxes, deregulating industries.
So a smaller government.
Yeah, less government intervention.
Okay, so two very different visions for the country.
For sure.
But it's not just about the presidency, right? We talked about those congressional races. How do they fit into these scenarios?
Remember gridlock?
Oh, yeah.
If we have a divided Congress, different parties controlling the White House and Congress, it's going to be really hard to get anything done no matter who the president is.
It's like a stalemate.
Exactly. They're pulling in opposite directions.
So what happens if we do get a unified government?
Okay.
Same party wins the presidency and control of both the House and Senate.
Well, then things could move a lot faster. Yeah, a unified government has a lot more power to enact its agenda.
So we could see a wave of new laws and policies.
Potentially, yeah.
That's a pretty dramatic shift.
It could be, for better or for worse, depending on your perspective.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Okay, but let's not forget about those state and local elections.
Oh, those are important, too.
I know. We talked about how they can be sneaky influential.
Right. They often fly under the radar.
But they have a big impact.
They do, especially on issues that affect our daily lives.
Like what?
Education, healthcare, criminal justice reform.
So even if I'm obsessed with the presidential race, I shouldn't ignore what's happening closer to home.
Definitely not. Those state and local races are super consequential.
They shape the policies that affect our communities.
Exactly.
And they can even become models for national change.
Like we saw with marijuana legalization, yeah.
Okay, I'm getting the picture.
Good.
But let's zoom back out.
Okay.
Global ripple effects, NATO, China, climate change. How might those play out in these different scenarios?
Let's start with NATO.
Okay.
A lot depends on the U.S.'s commitment, right?
Right.
Imagine a president who's skeptical of NATO takes office.
Okay.
They pull back troops, cut funding, signal a weaker U.S. presence.
What would that mean for Europe?
It could create a power vacuum, embolden Russia, maybe even increase the risk of conflict.
So countries that rely on the U.S. for security, they'd be nervous.
Understandably.
But what if a president who's a strong supporter of NATO wins?
Well, then we might see a renewed commitment to the alliance, more troops, more funding, a clear message of solidarity.
That would be a relief for a lot of countries.
I think so.
Okay, what about China?
Ah, yes, the U.S.-China relationship.
Super complex.
Incredibly complex.
And the 2024 election could really shift that dynamic.
It could. Imagine a president who takes a hard line on China.
Okay.
Emphasizing competition, maybe even engaging in trade wars.
That sounds tense.
It could be. It could escalate tensions, create uncertainty in the global economy.
What's the other option?
Well, some candidates might favor a more diplomatic approach.
Okay.
Focusing on areas of cooperation, like climate change or global health.
Right.
While also addressing concerns about human rights and trade practices.
So finding that balance.
Exactly. It's a delicate balance.
No easy answers.
No easy answers when it comes to China.
Okay, last one, climate change.
Yeah.
Big one.
Huge.
This election could be a turning point.
It really could.
How so?
Imagine a president who prioritizes climate action.
Okay.
They rejoin international agreements like the Paris Climate Accord, invest in clean energy, push for ambitious emissions reductions.
That sounds promising.
It could really jumpstart global action, inspire other countries to do more.
Okay, but what if a president who's not so focused on climate change wins?
Well, then we might see a rollback of environmental regulations, less funding for clean energy, a reluctance to engage in international negotiations.
That doesn't sound good.
It would be a major setback for the U.S. and for the planet.
Two different futures, depending on this election.
It feels that way, doesn't it?
It does. Okay, but let's come back to something we keep circling back to.
Yeah.
The health of American democracy. No matter who wins, what policies get enacted.
Right.
The bigger question is whether our democratic institutions can survive all of this.
All the polarization, misinformation, declining trust.
It feels like we're at a crossroads.
We are, and it's a question we all need to grapple with.
Okay, so what can we do?
As citizens.
Yeah, what can we do to safeguard our democracy no matter what happens in November?
I think it starts with a commitment to civic engagement.
Okay.
Staying informed, participating in the process,
Yeah.
holding our elected officials accountable.
So what does that look like in real life?
Well, we can start by educating ourselves
About
the issues, reading news from diverse sources, being critical of the information we encounter.
Don't just believe everything you see on social media.
Exactly. Fact-checking is crucial. Engaging in respectful dialogue, even with people we disagree with.
Even when it's hard.
Even when it's hard, listening to understand, not just to respond.
Finding that common ground.
Yeah, and participating in the political process in a meaningful way.
Like what?
Voting in every election, volunteering for campaigns, contacting our representatives, supporting organizations we believe in.
So showing up, speaking up, making our voices heard.
Exactly. Refusing to be apathetic or cynical.
Yeah, that's important.
It is. The future of our democracy depends on informed, engaged citizens.
Who are willing to participate, hold their leaders accountable.
Absolutely.
That's powerful.
This election feels really high stakes, no doubt.
It does.
But it's not just about picking a winner.
It's about something bigger.
It is. It's about shaping the kind of country, the kind of world we want to live in.
So stay engaged, stay informed, and stay hopeful.
Always.
The future is ours to create.
It is